long before you were born, back in April of 1970, probably before your parents were born as well, there was a space program called the Apollo program. And 3 of the Apollo rockets were supposed to go and land on the moon. Apollo 13, on its way to the moon, had an oxygen tank explode. Right? And as a result of that, many of the functions of the spaceship were no longer working, and the resources they needed to both land on the moon and return back to Earth were damaged or unusable. So NASA had to take time to work with the people, the astronauts on the spaceship, and ask, what materials do you have that we can use to help for the most important issue, and that's to provide oxygen for you. So they told the engineers back at NASA what was on the spaceship that could be used to develop this thing that's called a scrubber. It removes carbon dioxide from the air and turns it back to oxygen. And so the engineers were told what was there, and the head of the NASA Space Center said, all right, failure is not an option. Unfortunately for the 3 astronauts on the spaceship, the engineers did not fail. But for us, life happens and we do face failures at times. It's unfortunate, but all of us face failure at one time or another. Denzel Washington said, if you don't fail, you're not trying. If you don't have something you want, it's because you haven't done something you need to do. All right? Let me say that again. If you don't fail, you're not trying. If you don't have something you want, it's because you haven't done something that you need to do. All right? So failure happens. In this presentation, I'm going to use failure and defined as the inability to meet or an expectation that you have. Okay? Definition of failure in this presentation is the inability to meet an expectation that you may have. Okay? Let me give you some examples of failure. A student has a scholarship, needs to be in a class to be able to maintain that scholarship, and so he works with the teacher to try to get his grade up. He has a test coming up. He needs to get an A on the test, all right? And if he gets an A on the test, he gets a B in the class, and he maintains a scholarship. Right? Works very hard, studies with the teacher, gets additional help, takes the test, he gets a B on the test and a C for the class, he loses his scholarship. Another individual has a job, he loses his job, decides to get retrained in a different career field, all right? Passes that course of training very successfully, all right? Sends out 50 resumes to 50 different companies and doesn't get a single interview. A third example might be a young woman who wants to become a professional singer. She has an amazing voice, just beautiful voice like an angel, all right? And she participates in different contests. But what happens is she's criticized for her pronunciation of words and because of her weight. So she's too big to really be on television. So she loses her dream to become a professional singer because she doesn't win these contests. All of these are examples of how people might fail. Failure, unfortunately, has many impacts on us, and I don't want to, at any point during my talk, to minimize what failure is, all right? Because sometimes it has devastating effects on individuals. But failure, as I said, does happen. And it can have psychological effects, emotional effects. Some of those effects might be disappointment, sadness, worry, feelings of embarrassment. And especially those feelings may come up if there are other people that have expectations that you succeed as well. Then the feelings are doubled or much worse than they were just with you feeling bad that you failed. Other emotional things that happen psychologically is the person can feel anxiety. They may want to avoid situations. They may feel a loss of control. They may also want to feel like, or they may feel like they're helpless or powerless in life, right? All of those are difficult psychological situations that have to be dealt with by the individual. Most importantly is, as a result of these, a person can develop a sense of fear of failure. And so they end up avoiding anything that might put them in a situation where they will fail. One example of failure might be that a person may lose their sight of their goals in life. For me, for example, I always dreamed of being a professional pilot. That was my dream when I was a little boy, and I grew up dreaming to be a pilot. When I was a little kid, I played with airplanes. When I was in junior high and high school, I built our radio control airplanes and flew those. When I was 17, I got my pilot's license and then flew for years. But my eyesight always prevented me from being able to fly as a commercial pilot. I wasn't able to fulfill my goal. Was it a failure? I felt like I failed for a long time because that was my dream. And so instead I ended up in higher education, which has been a very successful career and very wonderful experience. Another experience that somebody might have is they may not be able to feel confident in their abilities as a result of failure, right? They lose confidence in what they can do, even though they're really able to do it, but they're afraid to try. Another example of failure may be that an individual feels very humiliated, discomfort, feeling a lot of discomfort because they don't have a lot of control. A lot of times we are unable to control all of the circumstances that we face or have to deal with. And so we end up failing because of those circumstances. But one of the things that's really important, at least from a psychological perspective, is that we learn how to deal with our attitudes. And there was a psychologist named Viktor Frankl who said, everything can be taken from us except the last of the human freedoms. And that freedom is the ability to choose your attitude at any given circumstance. Let me say this again. Everything can be taken from you except the last of the human freedoms, the ability to choose your attitude in any given circumstance. If you remember nothing else from my talk, which you may not, please remember these words. So we're going to say them together, okay? So you take these home with you, okay? Everything can be taken from you.
Everything can be taken from you.
Let's try that again. Everything can be taken from you.
Everything can be taken from you.
Except the last of the human freedoms.
Except the last of the human freedoms.
Which is the ability to choose your attitude.
Which is the ability to choose your attitude.
In any given circumstance.
In any given circumstance.
Well then, thank you. So how do you deal with failure? Well, psychologists would tell you the best thing to do to deal with failure is to analyze it, okay? So one is to be able to change your attitude, but then to analyze what things were you able to control and what things were you not able to control. The things that you're unable to control, push to the side. The things that you were able to control, you need to analyze and say, what could I have done differently? How could I have prepared differently? How could I have planned differently? How could I have executed things differently? So you analyze what's the best thing to do, how to not repeat the failure in the future. And most of us can do that at nighttime, trying to go to sleep at night, as we think back on what happened that we wish was different, and it helps put us to sleep. One of the things I always tell my staff is, I want you to be energetic, I want you to be creative, I want you to be innovative. All right, for us to stay up with college students, we need to have new programs, new ways of explaining things, new ways of encouraging students and to be successful in their experience in higher education. So I want you to be creative. I want you not to ever be afraid of failure, right? So try a new idea. If it works, great. If it doesn't work, figure out why it didn't work and try again. If it doesn't work the second time, then toss it to the side and try something new, all right? Don't ever be caught by the status quo and never be caught by the fear of failure. So what are 5 things that we can actually do? One is we'll all fail. The question is, what happens when we do fail? What do we do? All right. We can look at some of the famous people. Rowling, who wrote Harry Potter. How many times did she send her script in before, it was finally accepted? And look at her success. Steve Jobs, fired from Apple company in the 1980s, and had to start a different company, and then was brought back to Apple. And most recently, just in the last couple of weeks, the person that started Altman, who started ChatGPT, was fired from his company as well. And then over the weekend was brought back. Talk to celebrities, read the biography of famous people, and you'll see that failure happens to everybody. It's the issue of what they do with the failure and how they continue to pursue it. Failure can also be considered feedback in life, all right? Things that we might need feedback on are resilience, persistence, humility. Humility, for example, somebody that always uses the words I and me when talking about successes, but when there's failures are using the words they, he, she, it, right? That's somebody that probably needs to learn a little humility and should be switching those around and saying, my successes are because of them, they, it, and my failures are because of I and me. Right? Another thing is that sometimes it's darkest before the dawn, all right? And all of us that have been through failure before know that sometimes life just seems like it's not going to go on the next day. But you're all here. You've all gotten up. You all worked through whatever those issues or problems were and found how to move on. Another thing that's very important is that we always need to learn from our mistakes. And they say that when you make a mistake and you learn from it, it wasn't really a mistake. It was just a learning experience. So we have to learn from our mistakes. And finally, the last thing is don't give up, all right? Keep pursuing no matter what. You need to continue on. Keep pursuing what's important in life, all right? Not give up. Maya Angelou, a author and an activist in the United States, says, sometimes we face defeat, right? We don't want to face defeat, but sometimes we face defeat. And it's necessary sometimes, because defeat causes us to reflect on who we are, what's important to us, and most importantly, how do we move on from defeat? So, in summing up what I have to say, failure can lead to success, but it's the individual taking the responsibility in a healthy psychological way in which to be able to pursue their successes. Again, not giving up, reflecting clearly on what's important, reflecting on yourself, on how to do things differently, and not letting failure in any way paralyze you, finding ways to move on. A motivational speaker by the name of Les Brown said, on our deathbed, we'll be laying there, and there'll be 3 ghosts that will be standing around us. There'll be the ghost of things that were not tried, the ghost in terms of ideas, the ghost in terms of talents that were unused, and the ghost of conceptions that were never followed through. All right? He said, and those ghosts are going to be very angry at us, and they're going to say, we're dying with you. We never came to life because you never took the time to use us, to take advantage of us. So the question I leave you with is, how many ghosts are going to be standing at your bed? Good luck. Thank you.